Our ancient sacred text today is from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 15th chapter. And we'll be reading beginning with the 21st verse, contrary to what the bulletin said. Jesus left there and departed for the district of Tyre and Sidon. It happened that a Canaanite woman living in that area came and cried out to Jesus, "Heir to the house of David, have pity on me. My daughter is horribly demon-possessed." Jesus gave her no word of response. The disciples came up and repeatedly said to him, "Please get rid of her. She keeps calling after us." Finally, Jesus turned to the woman and said, "My mission is only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." She then prostrated herself before him with the plea, "Help me, Rabbi." He answered, "But it isn't right to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." "True, Rabbi," she replied, "but even the dogs get to eat the scraps that fall from the table." Jesus said in reply, "Woman, you have great faith. Your wish will come to pass." At that very moment, her daughter was healed. La palabra de Dios.
So last week, I started the sermon by saying I've been in the struggle. And I spoke a little bit about how we stay in the struggle, how we stay in the work. I've been struggling with, last week it was, the wildfires in Maui and so much else that's happening in the world. How do we stay in that struggle? How do we stay in this work of living in a conscious way in order that we try to contribute something positive and good? And I posed this question that we keep to and find our quiet center, as poet Ha-Jin says in his poem, and that we hold on tight to it every day to keep ourselves grounded enough to stay conscious and to stay in it. That we need to find a way to stay with the grief and move through it. This week, I'm still in the struggle. Maybe even deeper so as stories continue to emerge out of Maui, and as the smoke from nearby wildfires works its way into our city, and as the red eye of the sun rises over the horizon, as it did this morning, tainted even redder from the smoke. It's been hard to hold on to that center. Someone came to me this week and they said, Alison, holding to your center sounds an awful lot like spiritual bypassing, which is this idea that engaging in our spirituality, we can numb ourselves to the realities of the world surrounding us. It can sound a lot like just grasp onto your own little scrap of peace, your own little bit of equanimity, and just do what you can to survive. And I have to say that last week, although I hold to what I said, I was worried about that too. And yet, if I were to allow myself to sit every day fully in the grief, especially of the climate disaster that we're currently embroiled in, and of how very likely that we're already past the point of no return, and that in the grief, that the unrest and the instability that we're beginning to see in the world in response to that, direct or indirect response to that, it's just unfurling, it's just unfolding, it's getting bigger and bigger. And when I really try to sit and think of it, I think I would find it hard to get out of bed each day. So that's why I do say, find our quiet center, because although we have gone past the point of no return, we're still here. And the future is yet still unknowable. Connecting to that center, to our groundwater, that sacred being, it's something that I need to make it through every day. And there's another side to this conversation as well, because if the future is unknowable, it means that we have some scant ability still to contribute to change. And if that is true, then we have to participate in that change. These are dire times, and they do call for urgent response. So I've been struggling with this too, as I was reflecting on what does it mean to hold your quiet center and still lean in to the pain and take action. How do we hold them both? And I began to wonder if, in urging us to keep finding that quiet center, if I was sounding like one of those white moderates in Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, who keeps, like one of those white moderates who keeps urging Dr. King forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever to wait, who keep insisting that the direct action of Dr. King and his colleagues was taking were too radical, too harsh in the white moderates' eyes, that if Dr. King and his comrades just wait a little longer for the negotiations to bear out, everything will be fine. But as Dr. King says later on in his letter, those white moderates don't have to look in the eyes of their children and explain why they can't go to a certain park because of the color of their skin. And as he says, they don't have to see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. Dr. King gives many more examples as well. I encourage you to read the letter in its entirety. It's easily available online. So maybe it was some of this discomfort as I was feeling as I opened the Bible to read the gospel that made me feel so disappointed in Jesus when I read of his interaction with the Canaanite woman. If Jesus is supposed to be showing us the way, showing us how to be in this world, this is a pretty disappointing model for those of us who look to him for guidance. If I was opening this passage to ask the question, how to respond to the world, to the environmental and social challenges we face today and take it at face value, Jesus's example is not a very helpful one. Something to know about the Canaanite woman in this story is that she is an other to Jesus. The same story shows up in Mark, and in that version, she's a Syro-Phoenician woman. The point being, she's not an Israelite, and she's not Jewish, and she is a woman. And Jesus treats her differently because of that. She comes to him because her daughter is dying. And his first response is that he ignores her. He doesn't even deign to respond with words. In fact, the disciples are so annoyed with her that they ask him to send her away, and he does what they ask. He says, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. But she comes closer and she's more insistent. And do you know what he does next then? He compares her to a dog. He says it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to dogs. It's just so offensive. And yet she still comes closer. And she continues in her desperation to heal her daughter. Yes, Lord, she says, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their teacher's table. And when she says this, it's Jesus's eyes that are opened. She opens his eyes. And so the story ends, he honors her. He says her faith is great and her daughter is healed. This passage is often interpreted as a great feminist passage, that a Canaanite woman, a foreign woman, who in our white dominant American culture would be read as a Black or a brown woman, that she actually teaches Jesus the value of faith. But I have to tell you that the idea of having to convince my own God that I am worthy of healing, that is a bitter pill. God is already supposed to know and love us all. The Canaanite woman is like Dr. King saying, hey, don't make me wait. I've been waiting long enough. My daughter is at the brink of death. And Jesus is like the white moderate in this story, saying, your suffering is not important enough for me to do anything about that right now. And the way you're asking is actually putting me off a little bit. Just wait. If Jesus is really both human and divine, what we're seeing here is his humanity on full display. His prejudice, his closed-mindedness, his mistakes. It feels all a little too close to my prejudice, my closed-mindedness, my mistakes. Here's the best that I can make of this text. That maybe it is a story that's intended to be heard by an audience that is anti-Gentile, that did not want Gentiles included in the Jesus movement. That whoever wrote Matthew is speaking to a people for whom Canaanites were also an other. Jesus in this story is giving voice to what many in this audience probably would have felt, that the Canaanite woman wasn't just deserving of healing. We see this in our culture, that some people aren't worthy of health insurance, for example. By placing Jesus in that position, for the author to do that, and then for the audience to watch Jesus have a change of heart, and even praise her for having extraordinary faith, this story offers the ancient audience the opportunity to change their minds about the Gentiles. And at the end of the story, Jesus does change his mind. And he doesn't turn his back. The story, depending, when we look at who it's written for, it's intended to be about inclusion, that there is room in the Jesus movement for everyone. Not only that, but it is that the most marginalized in his society have the power to change his mind. So if there is a piece of hope in here, it's that all of us have the capacity to change. Even the white moderate, perhaps, who encourages more time in the face of death, can have a change of heart. This is a word of hope for all of us. We can change. I can change. As we live in these urgent times, clinging fast to our quiet center, to our groundwater, to our sacred, to God, we can also cling to the idea that all of us have the capacity to change. Here at Salt and Light and Leaven, what I want to suggest is that change starts with each of us. First, with our ability to see the white moderate within each of us. Part of coming to church should be about taking an honest look at our souls, about taking stock, clear-eyed and open, unflinching, about the nature of who we are as people and how we show up in the world. Perhaps what damage we cause. And we can do this because God promises us grace. Every day, God promises us grace. So that cloaked in that loving blanket of grace, we can level with ourselves about the things that we've done and are doing, and maybe can't escape doing, and keep trying to do better. There's no expectation to get it right, but to keep trying. Keep trying to be a little better than we were the day before. This is how we get to that inner change. And that inner change is where all of our change work begins. And then we move to outer change by leaning into community. By bringing that inner change work into conversation with other people's inner change work. By allowing ourselves to be seen in community, truly seen in the ways in which we thrive and the ways in which we fall short and are still loved by each other. It is in community that we can be lovingly held accountable to the change that we are seeking together. I really, really believe that we can change our context, our piece of this world, by being in community, through sharing our stories, identifying injustices, taking action together on what we see. This work, it spirals outward if we keep with it. It can lead to large-scale collective change, and we know how to do this. It's organizing. And it's slow. And it's too slow for this urgent context where we live. But it's all we have. And so it's trust work too, because we are trying to do what we can. This is what we can do. We keep building relationships. We keep taking action over the things that we can, over the things that we have the ability to change. We wait for the moment that comes, that strike when the iron is hot moment. We even try to make that moment come through our organizing. I wonder about those white moderates who read Dr. King's letter in 1963. I wonder how many of their minds were changed, like Jesus changed his mind in today's story. Looking at the state of the world today, 60 years later, it certainly seems like not enough minds were changed. And if we stay with that not enough minds were changed then, it can wreck us. But what does being wrecked do? How do we contribute to change being wrecked? Sometimes that is where we are, and that is okay. But when we can, and if we can stay to our center, I think that we do what we can with the power that we have. Take it one step at a time every day. Trust that the seeds that we are planting, we may never see the fruition, but they may yet come. They may yet sprout. We stay in the struggle, let the anger burn through you, let the grief wreck you, and then bring it right back here to community. Tell your stories. Let us hold it together. I promise it will change us. And then we will change what we can together. Amen. So here at Salt and Light, we hold several values, two of which are that we honor the wisdom of the gathered community alongside the wisdom of scripture and what the preacher brings or the storyteller brings. So as part of this Leaven community, I am going to invite you into the practice of reflection and into the practice of the one-to-one conversation, which is the building block of community. So this is always an optional practice. We have water and tea and coffee and a beautiful garden to walk around. Not every day is a day for a one-to-one conversation, but hopefully today is. And so I'm going to invite you to turn to a neighbor, and we'll take about until about 5 minutes to 11. And let's consider the question. Let's see. Here I am again. Haven't thought of a question yet. Wrote a whole sermon. Didn't write the question. What came up for you today? We'll just go with that. So let's take 10 minutes and I'll call you all back. Thank you.